Beyez Ras Hashem Yisbarach. We are here on Daf Yomi Meseches Chullin Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We're starting from the second line by the two dots. Reishis Hagez Einu Noyeg El Berechelim. Reishis Hagez is only Noyeg by a ruffle sheep. Correct the Gemara. Minani how do we know? Amar Bechizda Asa Giza Giza. We make a Gzera Shava for the word Giza. Ksiv Hacha Reishis Hagez Zayncha, which means of your sheep. Titen Lo you should give to the Kayin. Ksiv Hasam. There's a pasuk in Eiv that says, "Umigez kivsei yischamim," from the gaze of the kvasim you shall warm yourself, or you will be warmed. Ma lahalon kvasim avkan kvasim, which means a rachel, which is a kaves. Correcting Marvanel kiza kiza bechar. Want to learn make a gzera shabbat to bechar. And bechar it says, "Ditanya loy saved bechar sharchav loy sagis bechar tzayncha." Do not, you cannot, the iser to use your bechar. You cannot work with the bechar of your shar, and you cannot shear the bechar of your tzayin. Ainly, in the Gebraisa says there, I only know ala shar ba'avaita, that you can't work with the shar if it's tzayin begiza, because that's what the pasuk says. Minayin litan ha'amur b'shal zeh b'zeh b'esamur b'zeh b'zeh, that it's even usher to work with the tzayin, and it's even usher to shear the shar. Tablaim v'loi savayd v'loi saguz at all. And therefore, we see that a shar is something that you could do giza to as well. So I want to make a gzera shabbat to bechar, and even a shar should have a chiyuv Reishis Hagez. And that the Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Titin loy, you should give to the kayin, the loy l'saka, and not for his sak, which is a sackcloth. What does that mean? Rashi actually throws in the word loy limalbush. It has to be something that he can wear, the loy l'saka, and not something that you should just make a sack out of, which is all the hair of a shar is way to use with. And therefore, you can't make the Gzera Shava to Bechar because it wouldn't help you. Alameata, Sanat, the Gemara says, okay, if it has to do with the pasuk in Eiv, which says you are warmed by the shearings, that means it has to be real wool that you could wear. So then, Noitza shall izim l'chayiv, the noitza, which is the shearings of the izim of the goats, should also be chayiv in Reishis Hagez. And then the Gemara answers, Be'inan giza v'leka, you have to shear it, and you don't shear the hair off in A's. And Zakti Gemara, Man Shmayis Lehai Svar, who says that Svar that it has to be shorn specifically and not just cut off or however you pluck it? Reb Yosi, who? Reb Yosi, that is the sheet of Reb Yosi. The question is, how might Reb Yosi be to work? Reb Yosi is moide, that if that's the derech to do it, then that would be included. So even though you don't shear in A's, however you do it, if that's the way to do it, Rabbi Yosi would say that it would be included, and therefore it still should be chayiv in Reishis Hagez. Ella, rather, Zakti Gemara Kedam Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Lamoid Lishares, it has to be Davar HaRa'oi Lishares. It says by the Kayin, he stands and he's Lishares in front of Hashem, so the clothing has to be clothing that is right for Sheres. And even though the Izim might be something that that's considered Naitza, but it's not Ba'kavedika clothing. Hachanami davar l'sheres. Practic maral giza giza l'may asus. So then, why do I need the gzera shav at all to Eiv to tell me that it's kvasim yischamim? Anything that's it's proper clothing, l'shares. That's how I know what's chayiv in Reishis Hagez. The Gemara says, you know what giza v'giza is for? Lechede Tanya. The Chadatana the baby Shmal. The Tanya the baby Shmal. Kivasim shit samram kashim. Even if you have a keves and its wool is very rough, Peturim Reishis Hagez, it's Pater Reishis Hagez. Shenemar umigez kifsei yischamim. It has to warm you, and rough wool does not keep you warm. Zakti Gemara Tani Chader Geizes is a izim. One brisa says that if you shear the izim, v'shoitif es rechilim, or you wash them off to clean them, and hair detaches from it, pater, that those shearings are pater. V'tanya idach, have another brisa that says Hageizes is a izim pater. V'shoitif es rechilim is chayiv. And what washes off of the rechilim is chayiv. So it's a stira. One that says the rechilim, the pieces that come off is chayiv. One says pater. Like hasha harabanan Rabbi Yosi. The rabbanan say you're pater. Rabbi Yosi says you're chayiv. The Tanya leket tzir kitzircha v'loi leket kitov. It has to be leket when we're talking about the leket of your field, that which you cut down. V'loi leket kitov. It has to be that you're coming to harvest your field, not that you plucked it and you did it in an inordinary way. Rabbi Yosi Aimer, ein leket al haba machmas katzir. It has to be b'derech kitzira. what Rabbi Yossi, that's something same thing as Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi had a Tanakama that has to be B'derech Kitzira. The Gemara says, Kula Rabbi Yossi, this whole brisa is Rabbi Yossi. The Hakikah is what he means. Rabbi Yossi, I mean, the reason why Leket Kitzircha V'loy Leket Kituf, because a Leket Ela Haba Makmas Katzir. Amle Rav Achaber, the Rabbi Rav Ashi, Moed Rabbi Yossi, however, Moed be something, B'midi de Worche, however, the way for it to be picked, if it's picked in that way, then it would be chayiv. Did Tanya Rabbi Yossi Emer Katzir Eli Ela Katzir Oiker? What if I uproot something minayin Tamalemer Liktzar Toilish Minay? What if I just detach it Tamalemer Big Kutzrecha? So we see Rabbi Yossi says anything that you do in the way that it's meant to be done is going to be chayiv, and here it's referring to leket. But what we were talking about in Reishis Hagez when we asked, it says however you cut any animal the derek to do it should also be chayiv. We have a brisa that says it beferish. What does it say? You had rows of onions in between the vegetables. Each one has peah taken off individually. You take one peah off this whole field in entirely, even though it has different types. What do I see? What do I see beferish in here? That basically says each min, because it has a different way of picking it. Bitzalim, you're not kaitzer bitzalim. You probably are aiker them. And he says it's chayiv b'fnei atmai because the way you do it is the way that you're chayiv in it. There's two dots there. We're up to the next two dots. So the Mishnah says you have to have, what is the shear of Reishis Hagez? So there's a certain amount of sheep that you need to have, either 2 or 5. Then there's a certain amount of wool you have to produce from those sheep. Either one shita is mishgal chamesh slaim. The first shita is manaman upras, or chamesh racheles goyes kol shehein. So now the Gemara is talking about the one shita says meruba. Zakti Gemara kamahu meruba. How much is considered a lot? So there is a machlokes in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Either we jumped ahead. We're talking into how many sheep do you need? Is it, you have to have a meruba dika sheep. How many is a meruba? Beis Shammai says 2. Beis Hillel says 5. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Beis Shammai tarti nami ikri tzayin. Where did I get 2 from? Because the pasuk says Reishis tzayin, and tzayin plural is 2. Elo Beis Hillel, my time. Where's 5 come from? Where's the number 5 come from? Amar Kahana Amar Asuyos. Abigail came and she brought in her hand chamesh tzayin asuyos. 5 sheep that do what? That make what? The Gemara says, what is asuyos? She'oisais beis mitzvahs, that there's 2 mitzvahs you do with these 5 tzayin. What are they? Is it not Reishis Hagez umatanos? So that's how I see where I got from Reishis Hagez get 5. In fact, the Gemara, just because it says 5 tzayin, there's 2 mitzvahs you do, it doesn't say which 2 mitzvahs, right? Ema b'chayra. Maybe it means you have to get a b'char from the tzayin. In fact, on that the Gemara says it can't be b'chayra because umatanos. Maybe it means b'chayra umatanos. The Gemara says b'chayra chada mila mechayva. Even 1 sheep is chayav in b'char. That's not something that's special to 5. On that the Gemara says right away, okay, u'ataymech matanos chada mila mechayev. Even for matanos, matnas kunas, every 1 animal is chayav. So what hekrit from the fact that it says that there's 5 tzayin, that these are referring to matanos, every 1 tzayin is chayav matanos. Ella, it's not because of that. Ella Amr Bashi, Asuyais means Shema'asais es Ba'alehem, V'oimreis loy kum asay mitzvah. When you have 5 sheep, now they come along and tell the Bailim, there's a mitzvah you need to do with us that you couldn't do before. And that's referring to Reishis Hagez. And not that it's referring to Asuyais, that you do 2 mitzvahs. It's 1 mitzvah, Shasuyais, what do they tell them to do? Reishis Hagez. That's Beisel's Shita of 5. He said a new shita arba. You only need 4 sheep. How do I know? Shnemar by nezikin ve'arba tzayin takas haseh, and it refers to arba tzayin. We make the hekesh to there. Tanya Amarebi ilmali divrei Torah v'divrei beribi kabbalah. Rebbe says like this: if Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were coming from a pasuk in the Torah, divrei Torah, and beribi, who is Rabbi Yossi, was divrei Kabbalah, meaning he's coming from Tanakh. Rashi says is referred to divrei Kabbalah. Anan divrei beribi shemila. We would still listen to Rabbi Yossi because we always say Rashi says nimukai imay. The pshat's always with him. He's very glad. Kosher always says the right pshat. So if they were saying a pasuk in the Torah and he was saying a pasuk in Tanakh, we would still listen to his shita. Kol shekain divrei Kabbalah, that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are coming from divrei Kabbalah, divrei beribi, divrei Torah. So we're for sure going to go with your basic pshat that you need only 4. Frakti Gemara, but Amar Mar, ein hachra shlishis mafras. You don't say when you have a machlekes, as here, one says 5 and one says 2, and comes along with third shita, and he says, you know what, let's make up shara, let's say 4. We don't go with that. That's not called a hachra. That's not called leaning one way. That's called a new pshat. When do we say a famous thing of a hachra? Shlishi, somebody could say we have machlekes, and we're going to be machriya on like one side. Rashi brings a few examples, but he has to be saying one of the two tzadim. Here, one said 5, one said 2, and he's coming along and saying 4. It's a brand new pshat. Why would we go like that? We don't go with the third pshat. Rabbi Yechanan, the pshat is, Pnei Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi was not saying his own pshat. He was saying it over from, he's actually had a Kabbalah from the Nevi'im that it was 4. And that's why he says that pshat, we would go like that. Zakti Gemara, Reb Doisa ben Horkanos Aimer. Reb Doisa in the Mishnah said, how much wool do you need to get from the recheles in order to be chayiv? He says in our Mishnah, Chamesh recheles goizes mana upras. Each one needs to give a mana pras. That's when you're chayiv versus against. Nechachamim aimrim chamesh recheles goizes kol shehem. Any amount. So the Gemara says, Vikama kol shehem. How much is it kol shehem? There are 4 shitas. Amarav, mana upras, total. Rabbi Yosef Horkana said you need a mana pras from each one. Rav says that the shita of the Chachamim, that a kol shehu is a mana pras total. Ubavad shemichumashes has to be split up between all 5. And Rashi says the cheshbon, what that's going to end up being is lamed zion's 37.5 slime total. So that means from each one you have to be able to get 7.5 slimes worth. Ushmul Amar Shishim. Shishim is considered a kol shehu. B'nois and sela echas l'kayin, and you give 1/60th to the kayin. Rabbi Baruchana Amar Rabbi Yechanan Sheish. You only need 6 slaim, and l'kayin chamesh, you give 5 to the kayin v'achas, so he gets to keep 1. Elazar says kol shehin sheninu. Why are you giving shiurim of different amounts of value? It says the kol shehu, it means the kol shehu. These are the 4 shitas. Tanan v'kama nois and loy. But the Mishnah says, how much do you give to the kayin? Mishkal chamesh slaim. B'Yehuda shehin aser slaim biglil. So bish lama l'Rav. Rav said, how much are you getting? You're getting a manu pras total. Rabbi Yechanan, who says you're going to have a total of 6. It makes it can be that you're giving him 5. Ela l'Shmuel, that says you only have to give him 1/60th. Rabbi Lazar, who says you give a kol shehu. Kasha, how are you understanding the Mishnah that says you have to give 5 slime? On that the Gemara asks, Ulet hameich, will the Rav minicha? And according to you said Rav is good. Rav said you're giving you have a manu upras total. Is that, how is that going to work out? Ule Rav mi nicha v'ha Rav Shmuel damar tarvayu. Both Rav and Shmuel says Rishis Agayis is b'shishim is 1/60th, and you're telling me now it works out good. He says you're giving 5. But he says you only have a manu pras total, which is a lot. You're going to end up getting a 60th. You're giving a lot more than a 60th. So it's a steer and Rav himself. So why are you saying I have a problem with Shmuel and Rabbi Lazar? I have a problem with Rav as well. And that the Gemara says, Itmar Lo already spoke, he, Rabbi Shmuel, the Amri Tavayu, be Israel, that our mission is going to be talking about a Yid, Sheesh, like Gizim Harbe. He has many batches of Rishis Agayis to give. Askinon, that's what we're talking about. He wants to give it over to a kayin. The Amri Lei, and because he wants to give it to many different kayhanim, split it up. He has like a lot. So we say you have to give to each kayin. You have to give a chashav a shear. So if you have many sets of a what shear were we talking about before? Many shears of manu pras, and you want to give it to many kohanim, you can't give each kohen less than 5 slaim. However, if you have much less than that, and you're giving a 60th, that's not a problem either. Gufa, so this Rav and Shmuel that we're talking about, the Amri Tavayu, Rishis Agayis b'shishim, Truma b'shishim, Pei b'shishim, the 3 things that they say are shishim, Rishis Agayis, Truma, and Peah. Truma b'shishim, Ayvahanan Tanam, Truma ayin yafa achad marabayim. Since when is Truma a 60th? We said that someone who has Truma with the ayin yafa gives a 40th. And that the Gemara says, Deraisa b'shishim, and Derabanan b'arbaim. Correct the Gemara, Deraisa b'shishim, is that true? I don't think that's true either. V'hamar Shmuel, Chita achas, one little grain, Peteris agree, can patter up the whole pile, which is even less than a 60th. So the Gemara says, Deraisa k'dishmo, B'deraisa in chanami, one chita is enough. Derabanan b'deraisa, the Rabbanan said, in something that's deraisa, achas me'arbaim, you should give a 40th. And Derabanan, b'derabanan, the Rabbanan say, the Rabbanan's shita in something that's not chayav deraisa, which is only chayav derabanan, b'shishim. That's where the 60th comes from. What about peya b'shishim? Yeah, peya is the 60th, but it's not. We say it every day in davening. There is no shear. So what do you mean it's the 60th? And nothing more says deraisa in the shear, derabanan b'shishim. So my Kmashmalan, what do you need to tell me this for? I have a brisa that says ve'ein paisla peya mishishim apisha amru peya ilam shear. The brisa says beferish, you shouldn't give less than a 60th, even though there's no shear. And now the Gemara says hasam be'aretz. That's referring to it even in Eretz Yisrael, and hacha b'chutz la'aretz that we're saying in chutz la'aretz also is the same thing. Ki salak isi barhini, when isi barhini went up to Eretz Yisrael, ashkefei. Rabbi Yechanan found him. He was teaching his son the word, and he said it over Rechelim. So he told him, "Asni Rechelis, you should be teaching it Rechelis." He said, "Kediksiv." I'm reading the pasuk. Rechelim Messiah. Rabbi Yechanan said, "Lashon Torah la'atzma, lashon Chacham la'atzma." The Torah speaks one way, and the Chacham speak another way. So Rabbi Yechanan asked him, "Man Reish Sidra b'Bavel? Who's the one who's the Reish Rosh Hashiva in Bavel?" Amalei Abba Richa. Amalei Rabbi Yechanan says, "Abba Richa Karisale." You're calling him Abba Richa, the long one. Dechirna, I remember. Kava Yasivna Acher Yud Zayin Shuran Achure Derav Kamei Deravi. I was sitting 17 rows behind him when we sat in front of Rav. Benefiki zukuki denur mepumit Rav lepumet Rabbi, and Rav, when he would spoke, it's like going like fire shooting out straight to east to Rabbi. Umepumit Rabbi lepumet Rav. The less anayada mahin amram. I didn't even know what they were talking about. That's what a high level they were on. Obviously, we know that they were ranked by how far close or how far back they sat. And he's like, I was 17 rows behind him. So he's like way ahead of me. And not only that, I couldn't even understand what they were talking. It was like them two were on their own page. The Abba, Richa, Karisla, and you're calling him this nickname, this chashav mensch. Amalei, regardless, they moved on in the conversation. Amalei, Ihu, Reish Segez Bekama. So Isi asked Rabbi Yechanan, Isi Barhini asked Rabbi Yechanan, what's the shear for Reish Segez? It's a 60th. So he asked him, Anam B'chol Shein Tanan. Our Mishnah says it's a Kol Shu. So back to him, Imkein Ma Bein Li V'lach. What's the difference between me and you? And Rashi says, if you don't think I know how to explain the Mishnah, then I'd be no greater than you, right? It sounds to me like he's saying, there's a reason why I am greater than you, is because I know how to explain the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Kol Shu, and I'm telling you, I've learned from my Rebbeim that means a 60th. So you can't ask me, how can you say 60th? The Mishnah says Kol Shu. I know what I'm talking about. It's an interesting way of talking, but that's how I'm understanding the Gemara. Ki as Rav Dimi Amar. When Rav Dimi came, he said, Reish Sakez, Rav Amar B'Shishim, Rav Yechon Mishum Rav Yanai Amar B'Sheish, with the 6. Amar Lei Abayel Rav Dimi. Anachta Lon Chada, the Akashas Lon Chada. One thing that you said is good. The one thing I have a question on. Bishlam Rav Yechon like Hasha. When Rav Yechon over here he says 60. Over here he's saying 6. And in our Mishnah, or on the top of the Amud, he said 6. And now you're telling me he's saying 60. Okay, so it could be here he's saying Rav Yechon B'Shem his Rebbe Mishum Rav Yanai. I'll answer one is his Rebbe. Hadidei Hadirabe. Al Dirava Dirab Kasha. I have a kasha that you're saying Rav says 60, but on top we said Rav says Manu Pras. The Gemara speaks it out. El Rav Kasha Taha Rav Manu Pras. The Rav Nami Le Kasha. So he says it's also not Kasha, the two sheets of Rav. My Mana, the Amar, when Rav said Manu Pras, and now he's saying Mana, Ben Arba Islam. A Mana, which is 40 slime, is not a regular mana. It's a 40 years mana. and therefore mana pras is going to end up being a mana and a half, which is going to end up being 60, which is the same shita, the hamalei bishishem. In fact, Tana mana ben arbaim slaim. Would our Mishnah be referring to a mana of 40, which is very not common, and he's saying the pshat in our Mishnah? The Gemara says, yes, because I have another Mishnah also refers to a mana of 40. Vatnan, chemas chadasha, a leather bag, which is new. Afish mekabelas remind you, even though it can hold a remind, tahira, it's not a fartika kli, it's still tahar. However, if you were tafra it, if you sewed it up, it's done. And then it's a nikra and it rips. How much of a rip makes it an ice kli? Shiur combined to remind him. If Elazar ben Yaakov Aimer, kipakia shal shasi, it has to be able to be open like the shasi weave. Achas me arba mana, 1/4 of a mana, ben arba in slime. And we see this Mishnah also uses a mana of 40 in the case of a stam mana, so it's not shver. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow.